Chapter 17, Image 36B, Untitled, Earthquake Refugee Camp in Park, 1906. Cellulose nitrate negative 84 by 146 millimeters irregular. I feel as though we've been circling the same 10 blocks for hours, Williams says, yet each time we cross Sacramento Street, it has changed. He pulls his handkerchief from his pocket to mop his forehead again. Do you pray? The man admits, I can't remember ever doing it, though I wouldn't say I never have. If there's ever a time to start, William begins, but his voice drops as they walk on. The hunger erupts just as they make their way into Jefferson Square at dusk, while the sun lowers itself into the city. It is a violent, steady thing, the yearning in the man's belly as they walk, and he realizes he has no recollection of the last time he ate. His stomach cramps as he wipes his shirt sleeve over his forehead. A dirt path carves its way through the center of the park, and a string of benches lines the walkway, while groups of men, women, and children clutter the grass. He searches their faces for something familiar, his eyes desperate and easily distracted. Stumbling, his legs shake as they navigate the mob. Coffee, he thinks, black and thick, to wake him. Warm pieces of fresh bread and sharp cheddar cheese. But it is water that he needs most. Wagons and wheelbarrows filled with supplies and personal belongings are strewn throughout the camp, and he watches as, nearby, a handful of men shed their coats and hats and attempt to create some kind of shelter from strips of lumber and soiled sheets taken from building debris. He eyes the constructions, barracks or tents on wooden platforms for housing, small shacks scattered in a haphazard configuration on the grass. A large sign reading, Committee for Housing and Homeless, leans against a tree, and next to it a young woman in a bulky feathered hat pulls blankets from a stack at her feet, handing them to anyone who requests one. Perhaps that is something he can do, volunteer for an organization such as this. He begins to approach the woman, but stops when William tugs the sleeve of his coat. I know him, William says as he starts across the path toward a man perched near a tree. He is the cousin of a partner at my firm. Franklin, he calls. Introductions are made, and as they shake hands, Franklin asks the two, Are you hurt? This is a recurring question the man cannot find an honest answer for. He is not physically hurt, but disorientation engulfs him like a casket. His memory is torn and tousled, and the not knowing is impossibly painful. Franklin tells them that his wife and son accompany him, though they are searching the tents for family and friends. My mother-in-law, Franklin says, as he pulls out an engraved silver cigarette case. She lives alone in Hayes Valley, but by the time we got to her neighborhood, they weren't letting anyone through. He shakes his head. Old Mill? He asks as he lights the cigarettes and hands them out so that all three men have smokes clamped between fingers or lips. Did you hear about the Hayes Valley fire? That morning, a woman began to cook breakfast on the stove, not realizing that their chimney had collapsed during the quake. Ham and eggs, Franklin tells them as the smoke unfurls from his mouth. There was no water to fight the flames, he says. Here, let's sit. And then motions to a set of brown luggage trunks with brass fittings stashed beneath a nearby tree. The winds have been blowing, he said, and the fire swept over St. Ignatius Church and the college, too. Just heard the last of City Hall has collapsed. He smokes and flicks ashes as he speaks, quickly, his voice barely above a whisper. The fire jumped Market Street. I can't imagine she made it out of the area. Ruth, my mother-in-law, that is. The three pull on the cigarettes, though the man's throat burns and his eyes sting as he does so. He must not be a smoker. Eventually, he drops it to the ground and stamps it out with his foot. Most homes have them, Franklin is saying, the chimneys or furnaces fueled by wood and coal. Turns out they're promoting the spread of fires just as much as the wind is. The man has seen dozens that day, chimneys that have crashed through roofs, crumbled to the floor, and torn holes through the homes as they fell. And he imagines families in the beds that morning crushed by the collapsed flues. It's happened all over, Franklin says. I'm guessing it's happened to Ruth, but Emma wants to see the lists. She says she has to see Ruth's name on one list or the other to believe it either way. Says if she can't find the information here, We'll leave for Golden Gate Park tomorrow to check with the registrar. That's the best you can do, I suppose, he tells them. Seek some kind of proof. They talked of the Mission District, where tenements folded like accordions. South of Market saw the worst of it, the tightly packed wood frame construction making for fast fuel. They say the police are starting to shoot those trapped in the wreckage, Franklin tells them, shooting them to put them out of their misery. The man thinks of the slaughtered Longhorns, killed because their fear and confusion turned them wild. With the instatement of military rule declared, there's been, in effect, a suspension of law, Franklin says. Who's in control? No one, as far as I can see. Do you know anything about the volunteers? The man asks. I would like to help somehow. He turns to William. Once we find your brother, I would like to volunteer. He imagines pumping water and operating hoses to douse the flames, helping maintain order in the camps, and participating in the reconstruction of the city. There is comfort in the vision of working with steam and water, pumps and levers and tools. Surely you can find information in Golden Gate Park, Franklin says as he scans the crowd. A pause and a sigh. Where will we all go? Where will the food come from? And where will we sleep? He asks. I can't imagine how long it will be before the city feels normal again. Jefferson Square grows into a carnival of grief and confusion when night falls. Hungry children are tucked into makeshift tents. Candles are lit as locals walk the lawn, calling for those still missing. Fistfights erupt over food, over park benches, over blankets, over jugs of water and packs of matches. The man and William walk through a tent of survivors being treated for injuries and find no familiar faces, with the exception of a woman William purchases milk from at the grocery and a young teenage boy he once met during a trial. They ask the nurses about William's brother, but there is no information. He must be growing desperate, William says, while they scan a list tacked to a tree next to the medical tent. At the top, it reads, deceased. Nighttime was always difficult for Henry. They walk Laguna Street as evening wears on. They have no shelter, no water, no food. The benches have been claimed hours earlier, and the sky grows dark. My house collapsed before I had time to think, William says, apologizing. I should have grabbed blankets, should have packed a bag with food and filled jugs of water. They pass a man playing a washboard, the hat at his feet collecting change. Next to him, a woman and a young girl are curled under a blanket with a small dog tucked between them. There are bonfires, no peddlers' signs leaning against white sheeted teepees, and children careening through the darkness as they bump into one another, laughing. He sees her then, a teenage girl with dark hair, light freckles, and a profile that at once feels familiar as a panic streams within him. She is alone and walking quickly through the crowd, with a loaf of bread tucked under one arm. He bolts, leaving William as he follows her, 2 syllables pulsing in his throat, but having no form, no name to match the beats. 1, 2, a name he has said 1,000,000 times, it seems, loudly in daylight to get her attention in a crowd, softly in a bedroom to calm her to sleep. He desperately tries to find the letters that make the name he knows but cannot trace, the name he can use to call her to him. And then she stops at the corner of Turk Street, looking both ways and running her fingers through her hair, slowly enough that he is upon her. Catching his breath, a 3-beat sigh. Excuse me, he says. But when she turns, there is no recognition between them, nothing but shadows at their feet. I'm sorry, he says. I thought you were someone else. Though he can't imagine who. She nods and crosses the street. She is out of sight by the time William reaches him. I thought, he says, the words unnecessary as William pulls the man into his arms. The man's face is wet, and he stands there on the sidewalk with a stranger who has become his closest friend. William says over and over again, it's all right, it's all right, it's all right.